Hi, I'm Mellisa Smith.
I'm Serena Halstead.
And I'm Spencer Ziegler, and welcome to Data Light. And we are winding down our feedback series today. Throughout this series, we've really made a lot of different distinctions about feedback. We made distinctions by level, like feedback on task, processing, regulating self, by type, descriptive, evaluative, by the audience. But one distinction we haven't really dove too deep into is by the medium, that face-to-face versus digital. I feel like there's been a really relevant distinction this year with the pandemic, but we kind of need some help for how to really untangle it a little bit. So for this, we've been fortunate enough to have a triumvirate. I can't believe I just used the word triumvirate in the podcast, but we're going to keep that in there. A triumvirate of experts at our disposal here to turn to. So we got Wake County Digital Learning Coordinators Sadie Hoover, Chris Zirkle, and Katie Haywood joining us today. Chris and Katie, you might recognize their voice from the tremendous WCPSS Digital Learning podcast. Subscribe to that if you have not already done so. Sadie, Chris, Katie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, our pleasure. So we want to dive right in and have some conversations about digital feedback and how to use it. And let's start with chatting about what digital feedback can do. So Grant Wiggins stresses that feedback should be goal-oriented, tangible yet transparent, actionable, user-friendly, timely, ongoing, and consistent. Which of these do you think digital feedback can elevate?
I'll jump in with that one because to me, the power of using technology to provide digital feedback is more in the management piece. Technology can't change what you're going to say. It can't put the words down for you. It can't make your feedback more goal-oriented or tangible. But what it does allow you to do is to provide feedback more quickly, more easily, which allows you to then be more timely and consistent. So those important pieces there. And there are a variety of tools that let you do that. There are comment banks in Google Classroom. You can create your own comment bank in Google Keep, so that you're not having to type, similar comments over and over again, but simply have those comment banks ready to paste and personalize. But then there's also other tools, digital tools that allow you to provide more visual feedback or audio, like a screencast or a Bitmoji or a badge. So when it's easier, faster, and more efficient to provide the feedback, you're much more likely to take and have the time to do it and do it well.
Yeah, and students are probably, if it is all those things, and students are probably more likely to have their guard down and to receive the feedback too, if it is a little bit quicker and personable and all those things there. So I like that.
So in your episode on flavorful feedback, you mentioned how the goal was not to convert courses to online courses when we were transitioning into remote learning, but to transform them and to maximize the beneficial aspects of online format while minimizing the detrimental ones. So what does this look like for feedback specifically? How do we transform as opposed to simply convert our feedback when we're working online?
So when I think of traditional feedback, there are a couple things that come to mind. Written comments typically and verbal comments, those face-to-face conversations with students or those things we write on their papers, whatever. And so there are some ways to recreate those digitally, like the comment banks that I mentioned or the screencasts that, give you that chance to give the written or verbal feedback. But like you said in your question, that's just kind of recreating what we normally do. And so when we're providing feedback online, the technology allows us to speed up that process, which then gives us time to create better feedback, if you will, more richer feedback. So if I were working with a student in class, let's say on a math problem or something, I might tell them, oh, think back when we solved that problem together as a class. But if we're in this kind of blended online format, I could write that feedback, but then I could also maybe link an instructional video that either I created or that the kids watched that they could then go rewatch on the spot and adjust their work then. So, when I'm giving feedback digitally, I can make my feedback so much richer because I can really use resources that I've used in my instruction to support my feedback so that the learning can continue and they can actually go then and adjust their work as opposed to that traditional end product feedback, so to speak.
I like that example, especially of linking like a video, instructional video. I'm a math teacher by trade. And so I'm just thinking that was like a mind blowing thing when you just mentioned. It's like, wow, that could have taken my lesson to the next level.
Yeah, that makes me think of, well, I think it's Hattie has those questions. Was it feedback should answer 3 things: where am I going, how am I going, and where to next? And that where to next is maybe the most important, but also the toughest. So the idea of just being able to hyperlink, so it's really easy for the kids to jump to that resource or to that whatever is next. That's great. I love that.
Well, and even in Google Forms, you know, if you set up your form to be a quiz, you can put feedback in for both correct and wrong answers.
Yeah.
Right,
so,
right.
you know, you could have a link or a video to an extension activity or a link or something. And then they, as they're checking their answers, they could be like, oh, I got that one wrong. Oh, but she put a video in. Why did I get it wrong? Make it a detective game kind of thing. So,
Yeah. And if I can jump in really quick. So you point out feedback can be tied to correct and incorrect answers. And it only takes a teacher a minute to put in for each. I think that's really interesting about the idea of using feedback for the correct ones too. Because one of the things we heard talking with students was that sometimes feedback can feel like a weapon, that it's something that just makes them feel bad. And you really need to hit that like compliment sandwich. So if they're also getting feedback on the stuff that they do well, and digital tools allow teachers to do that more effectively and efficiently, that's going to make them a little bit more receptive to when they do need feedback for things that they could improve upon. So that's a good point.
And I think too, you know, it kind of draws out where I think for kids, when they hear feedback, it's, oh, I'm getting feedback because I need to improve on something. But sometimes you can just get feedback when no improvement is needed, and you can highlight that. So I think that's a really good distinction as well. So also in that Flavorful feedback episode, and I think also in your digital badge episode, you talked about this use of gamification and badges. Now, does this work for all students? I was thinking kind of like in my daughter, like she's not a big game player. So if students are not into gamification, how can teachers appeal to those students with this whole notion?
Yeah, I don't think that all students can be motivated or impacted by digital badges or gamification. I also don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all type of feedback. I would propose that a teacher invest their time and be able to develop a sense of what will impact each student. The teacher will need to get to know their students and the types of feedback that are most effective for each individual student. You know, so for example, some students may value a smile and a facial gesture, while others may need verbal feedback, or other students may prefer written feedback, while others cherish digital badges and gamification. Surveys can help speed up the process of a teacher learning the type of feedback their students prefer.
I like that idea too. So you're talking about like at the beginning of the year, kind of getting a sense of what type of feedback do you prefer? And then I think too, it's not just the type that they prefer, but I think some things, some activities or some learning lend themselves, I guess, to just a smile. I think when you had that teacher there who was talking about it, where you can just, I think that ESL teacher, and he talked about, you can just, sometimes just a smile or one of those badges would work. But then that's like the entryway into deeper and more specific feedback.
Yeah, again, it's an investment of time that I think is worth the payoff, so to say, which will return, getting it back from your students being able to value the feedback you're providing them. So if you just have one medium of feedback you're providing your students or one format, you know, that's also probably not maybe equitable for all students that would desire or be impacted by a different type of feedback that you're currently providing them.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to one of the advantages of, sure, digital tools, but also professionals such as yourselves, in that it can really untap teachers to have a myriad of different approaches for how to provide feedback without them having to, clone themselves, so that they're giving different face-to-face feedback for every single kid. Just in the same 5-minute span, if there's a couple different tools, each kid can get feedback in a way that is beneficial for them and not so time consuming for the teacher. So it's not the entire class period.
And I like that Chris spoke to, you know, investing and getting to know kids, because I think sometimes when teachers hear this, they think, okay, now I got to do badges for everybody. And it's not a everybody thing. Like, you know, sometimes we like to do, all right, throw out everything and then let me do this one thing. And it's again, adding to a teacher's tool belt so that, again, you could do more of that customization for your kids.
And on that, Mellisa, it's also about the teacher knowing the student as well. Because if you know the students, you over time you will know what will work with that particular student.
Yeah, there's that, was it typical mind fallacy, the idea that everybody's brain works the way that yours does. So I think sometimes it's tempting to think like, oh, I love badges, or I love the smile and conversation or something, so all my students must as well, when each kid might be comfortable with a different kind of thing. So it doesn't matter what works for you, it matters what works for kids. Exactly. And that's where the digital tools might be able to give you some options there.
Yes. So, Sadie, I have a question for you. When you spoke with Chris and Katie about digital feedback over the summer, you discussed how descriptive feedback should feel neutral so as to avoid feeling evaluative. When we talk with our students, they said that sometimes seeing feedback delivered through digital comments can be misinterpreted as being judgmental since you can't read the tone in the comment. What are some ways we can provide meaningful descriptive feedback digitally?
That is a powerful question to ask, I think, Serena, and I'm glad you asked that. I think even as adults, sometimes we have this little bit of intimidation or sense of dread almost when we get feedback, right? Because at some point, I think we've all experienced that feeling of sort of being squashed when we thought we were doing the right thing, or maybe the type of feedback we got wasn't our preference, and it kind of knocked us down a notch, right? Yeah. And so I think we have to remember that and what that can feel like, because it's important when we're considering digital feedback, right? There's a whole piece that's missing. In-person, face-to-face feedback gives us an opportunity to see body language, right? Does my teacher look angry? Are their shoulders down, or are they open, right? Shoulders back and feeling, I'm seeing this feeling of like happiness, right? What are their eyebrows doing? We're missing a lot of that, the voice intonation, when we're seeing the digital feedback. And so when we provide the digital feedback, we need to make sure we're still trying to make up for some of those things that are missing. We're not able to combine that gentle smile or the stern look, the lean forward, right, in that remote setting. And so students are often reading that feedback asynchronously too. So we have to consider that as well. They may leave a digital comment and kind of not feel good about it, even when the comment came from a really good, well-intended place from the teacher, right? We think about the creator of emojis with messaging, right? Who put the first smiley face in an email, right? Because that text needs some more stuff to it. We as humans need that extra feedback piece of seeing what the intention is behind the words. And so I think as teachers, we can give meaningful descriptive feedback by doing things like recording our feedback, right? Let them hear our voices, and even, creating a screencast where we use that camera. I know as adults, we often don't like to see ourselves on camera, but the students need to see our facial expressions. They need that human connection so desperately. And when we're giving that feedback, if they can see what our face looks like and what expressions we're making, or they can hear the intonation in our voice, it's really going to help them receive that feedback in a more meaningful way and in a safer way, right? Because then they're going to be more likely to interpret your feedback the way you intend it to be. And if you don't have an option to record every time, use emojis, right? On our laptops, we have emoji keyboards, there are Chrome extensions, there are ways we can include some of those emojis, and even doing simple things like including the name, like, wow, Serena, I noticed in your work, I saw this, right? You were able to do this. How about trying this next time, right? And giving that really specific feedback by just including the student's name makes it more personal, right? So we honor what they did well, but then we follow up with like what progress they've made and then how they can continue to succeed. And I think another important part is avoiding that judgmental language. There are lots of options of what judgmental language can look like, but take out the parts like, I think you, right? Like link it back to that standard. Like what are we supposed to be seeing? What did we see? What did we not see? And how can we get there? And so I think providing strategies and examples of how the learner can grow is a really important part of giving that digital feedback, because we don't want to diminish the efforts of the students. We want to leave them with this feeling of like, okay, now I can move forward. I understand what my teacher needs to see me doing next, and here's the tools I need to get there.
Well said, Sadie. I like that. I like the idea of you saying, starting off with something positive first and then going back to, focusing on what the standard requires. I really like that. So Chris, I also have a question for you. We spent a bit of time talking about how students can receive valuable feedback digitally, but how can teachers get input on how they're doing in this medium as well?
I would ask my students to provide me feedback on how I can provide them more support, and even how I can provide them feedback as well. Because students, in my eyes, are our clients, they're our customers, they're our primary stakeholder. I think we should seek their perspectives, their inputs, their comments, feedback, and even suggestions. And what they provide me could provide me with valuable insight that I could use to help improve my teaching practice. For example, right now, teachers are kind of like my students. As DLCs, we work a lot with teachers. We do a lot of sessions. And we literally have a feedback form we provide at the end of each session, because we are truly seeking feedback from the people that we support, which are teachers. And just recently, we provided some sessions to some APs, and we did receive some feedback. And, the feedback isn't always going to be negative or perceived that way, but the feedback that was provided to me actually let me realize that, they were saying they want more time to practice or more time to use the tool that I was teaching them. So I spent so much time on the content, and I left very little time for application for them to explore. And so that's valuable insight, and if I hadn't asked for that, I wouldn't be aware of that. And so now moving forward, I'm making sure that if I'm in that kind of a session where they're working with something that's hands-on, that I make sure that I set aside time for them to explore and use that resource so they can then, possibly then ask for help with it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, how students are the people whose input we should seek out most. And just the process of asking for feedback can show kids that you respect them. By asking for feedback, it's a sneaky way to build those relationships, which is going to improve things for you down the line. And also, it can probably be a sneaky way to have them think about the standards. Because if you're asking them to give you feedback on how well you taught, what happens when you heat water or something, whatever the standard might be, that forces them to think about how that material should be taught. And they're kind of going through and reviewing the standards as they do so. So I think asking for feedback from the students is really beneficial. And there's probably a lot of ways that digital tools can help you do so.
And it also allows you to model that whole feedback cycle, right? How do we give feedback to each other? And again, bringing back those things that Grant Wiggins talk about, the specificity, right? So how do we talk about the specifics? How do we make it not personally, but again, keeping it to the standards and taking away that value judgment? It allows you to then model that so that students can then give feedback not only to you as a teacher, but amongst themselves, with peer-to-peer feedback.
And I think too, Chris, that analogy of, the DLCs, the kind of the teachers are our students, and modeling, or the practices we use are similar. I think that's a really good analogy, because another thing that we do is we also work with each other to not only get feedback on our feedback, but also, feedback on our practices and things, and not to get too meta here, and so there's this whole added layer where if you're giving feedback to kids, you could even open up this idea of them collaborating with each other to say, I got this feedback from my teacher. How can what would you suggest that I should do? So there's just all these ways of, getting this input where they're helping you. You can even get input from your peers, on your feedback for your students. And so it opens up this new dynamic of collaboration and responding to feedback as well.
I think the desire for me to improve has to be stronger than the fear of possibly hearing something that is true or maybe not true. But it's got to outweigh that. I want to improve so much and be the best teacher I can be, that I'm willing to ask my students to give me feedback that may be something I need to hear.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about this series is that how to give and receive feedback isn't just like an educational question. That's just part of being human. So I think it's important for everybody, for the teacher, for the students, for the administrators, for the parents, for everyone to kind of be on both sides of that. So, and I think that their digital tools can, going back to what you said originally, Katie, digital feedback is not different than face-to-face feedback, but it can allow us to do so a little bit more efficiently and effectively.
And Spencer, I'm so glad you said that, that's just it, that it's something all humans do, giving and receiving feedback, because that's one of the biggest mantras, I feel like in the technology world, is when we're getting kids to do things, we have to teach them how to do things.
Yep.
We have to teach them how to give feedback. We have to teach them how to receive feedback. We have to teach them how to, collaborate. We have to teach them how to communicate. So many of these soft skills, we don't incorporate and think about that. If somebody doesn't tell them how to receive feedback and what to do with it, they don't know what to do. They'll just be like, okay, so.
I like that, Catherine. It's all about setting them up for success.
Yeah. And as Chris, earlier today, you mentioned the phrase investment in time, something along those lines. And I feel like that's key with this digital tools, or just reaching out to your DLCs to have them teach you something. Is that, yes, think of it as an investment in time, because it might take some time to learn some of these skills or strategies or set some of these things up in your LMS or wherever it might be. But it's going to save you so much time on the back end, because doing something right the first time is going to mean that you don't have to do it over and over and over again. So please reach out, use your DLCs. They're one of the best resources that we have in this district. Okay, so let's wrap it up with this. So what's one practical tip that you each have for teachers regarding digital feedback? Chris, we can start with you.
I think we should show or tell students what they need to hear. In other words, we need to be honest with them in order to truly help them. For example, I love the use of visual or audio feedback. Like Screencastify is a quick and easy way to provide students with visual audio feedback. You simply record the feedback, then share the link with your students.
Yeah, I think that's good. I like that. Katie, what are your thoughts?
For me, it really goes back to leveraging those resources. Use the things that you use in your instruction to help support the kids when you give the feedback. Link the videos for them to review. Link the activities for them to progress to. And really make that feedback really rich.
Oh, that is good. Thank you. Sadie?
I had a really hard time narrowing it down to one, so I'm going to give...
Yeah, please do.
What's your top three?
Yeah, I know, right? There's so many tips we can provide. See, that's why you need to reach out to your DLCs, because we have more for you. So my big one that I try to remind everyone is just start with one thing. Please don't try to overwhelm yourself with trying all of the things that were suggested today. Start with one, get good at that, and then move on, right? Pick one tool or one strategy. And once you're comfortable with that one, grab another one, right? Because everybody has different needs, but we also know that your time is so limited. So stick with one, try it, and add to your tool belt as you go. And I think the other thing you need to do is work as a team. I believe maybe Katie had mentioned earlier about some commenting and things. I think it's really important to find some tool like Google Keep or, a shared Google Doc or something where you and your PLT can keep standards aligned comments in a bank, right? And then take those, because like I said, your time is so limited, is share those comments with each other, but then just follow up by making sure when you copy and paste those comments that are standards aligned, add some of that personalization to it, because that's so important for students to be able to receive the feedback well, right? We want it to be helpful for them. And so, grabbing those copy and paste comments, but then personalizing it, I think is a really important thing to do.
That's good. My one, I didn't necessarily ask myself originally, but I'm the host, so I'm going to do it. My one practical tip is going to be to subscribe to WCPSS Digital Learning, because it's a wonderful podcast, and you'll get a lot more practical ideas like these in here. Well, with that, we're actually bringing to close our feedback series, which this has been fun. I've enjoyed it. And actually, this is kind of our second to last episode in this season. So the next episode, Mellisa, Serena, and I are going to reflect back on this season. And we'd love to hear from you, anything that you'd like us to address. If you have any questions for us, You can reach us at www.wcpss.net/datalit. And you can also receive credit if you're a Wake County teacher for listening to any of these series. You just kind of reflect back on what you took away and show some kind of artifact that shows what you did with it. So if you want some credit for listening to us, check out the website for that. Chris, Katie, Sadie, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
We'll catch you next time.